Hey there, career seekers. Welcome to Find Your Passion Career. I'm here to help you find a career you like, and dare I say, possibly even love. I'm your host, Amanda Nachman. I'm the founder and CEO of College Magazine. After working with thousands of college students, I've noticed that when it comes to career, there's a lot to demystify. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Today I have with me Alexandra Levit. She's the author of the international bestseller, They Don't Teach Corporate in College, a 20-something's guide to the business world. Her latest book, Humanity Works, reveals what the robot takeover will really look like, helping you prepare for the possibilities of the future. She is an influential thought leader on career and workforce trends, who has been instrumental in developing and promoting proprietary research on the future of work, the millennial generation, gender differences and bias, and the skills gap. Alexandra's goal is to prepare organizations and their employees to be competitive and marketable in the future business world. Welcome to the podcast, Alexandra.
Thanks for having me, Amanda. It's great to be here.
I want to take you back to your first book. What don't they teach you in corporate that you wish you had learned in college?
Well, that's a great question, Amanda, and that speaks to why I wrote the first book to begin with. And the reason that I wrote it is because I had graduated from a pretty good school with a very good record. And I thought I was just going to saunter into the business world. I was going into public relations at the time. I thought I'd be a VP by the age of 30, no problem. And it was easy to think that because as a student, you just put in a lot of individual effort and you study, and then you get a grade spit back out at you. And it's a simple process. But in the business world, things are a little bit different. It really doesn't matter how hard you work individually. What matters instead is what people think about that work. Do they respect you? Do they like you? Are you able to gain cooperation and collaboration from people who you might have no authority over? And this was a lesson that I had to really learn the hard way. I spun my wheels for the greater part of 3 years in 3 different positions, trying to figure out why I was churning out great work product like there was no tomorrow. But I had a boss tell me I was a square peg in a round hole. I had another one say, your coworkers don't like you, you don't fit in here. I had another one tell me I was overeager. I really wasn't getting a lot of positive feedback at all. And that was when this light bulb went off and I was like, wow, someone should really write a book for other 20 somethings on how to make this transition from college to career. Because if I had known these things starting out, I probably would have developed a better sense of how to impress people in the right way, how to gain that cooperation and collaboration that I talked about, how to be diplomatic in presenting my ideas. These were all things that just never came up in college schooling. Even though I got a pretty basic liberal arts education, it just didn't come up. And if I had understood those things, perhaps at the intern level, or if I'd been exposed to these concepts when I was in a business class or communications class, I think I would have been a lot better off. But unfortunately, I had to have some trauma and agita during my first couple of years out in order to realize the importance of these lessons. And I wanted to help other 20 somethings avoid that 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 year period where they're working hard and really not seeing the results that they would like.
Yeah. And I think I'm hearing a little bit about buy-in, right? If you don't have that buy-in first.
Exactly.
Whereas in school, you don't really need that buy-in because it's like they're forced to be on your team and you're all going for this grade. The reward system is different.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's a lot more individualized. You put in the work, you immediately see the payoff. And if you go into the business world, into a corporate job with that sense, you could sit in your cubicle, or even worse these days, you could sit at home and no one would have any idea what you were doing and would struggle to see how you add value. And I think especially in this climate that we're in right now, people all the time ask me, I know you didn't ask this, but people ask me, how is your book relevant today? And I would say you have to be out there making a good first impression, reminding people of the value that you have. I call it the professional persona, the mature, professional, competent face you project to the work world. You have to be proactive about it, because if you aren't, you're not going to get noticed at all. You're just going to be run over by the everyday realities and stressors of business. And it's nobody's fault. It's not that you're not confident or you're not good at what you do or you don't have potential. It's just that it's harder to stand out in a climate where everybody is kind of isolated right now, doing their own thing. Your professional development and your satisfaction and meaning in your job is not top of mind. And that's just a fact. So you have
Mm.
to be out there and really putting yourself forward to get the best possible work experience.
So the cliche, your work speaks for itself, is incorrect. The work is not speaking for itself. You have to speak up about the work.
Amanda, that's perfectly said.
Okay. So you've had these traumas and you've faced these career, struggles. Can you talk about, a big message that I share in my book is that feeling of like not feeling qualified,
Mhm.
not feeling good enough. I mean, you got the roles, right? Were there times where you were facing these career rejections or feeling unqualified even in those roles?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that everybody feels this way to some degree. I think women are more prone to feel this way. There's been a lot of research that has shown that women will want to be 100% qualified for anything they go after, whereas men in many cases will be satisfied if they only meet, 5 out of 10 criteria, 6 out of 10. And
Mhm.
that's just kind of a natural thing. I don't know if that's culturally conditioned or if there's something biological there, but I have definitely felt insecure many times and relied a great deal on external validation, and not just external validation of one person, like a manager or a colleague, but I wanted external validation from everyone. If there was anybody I was working with that was not completely satisfied with what I was doing, it would crush me. And the worst process actually was trying to become an author and all the rejection that's inherent with that. I mean, you just have to expect. I mean, back when I was publishing my first book, there weren't as many options for publishing. You really had to go the traditional route of getting an agent and then getting a publisher. And there was just a ton of rejection in that process. And just being able to kind of keep your head high and say, I think I've got something here, and really drive your motivation from within, believing that you had something to offer and not relying on other people to say that for you. I think it's a rite of passage that takes some people a long time. And I think if you can develop that internal sense of peace, that internal sense that you are good enough, that will serve you well for your entire life. And so these are some of the concepts we talk about in They Don't Teach Corporate in College, because again, if you can avoid being 45 years old like some of the parents of my initial readers and struggling with these same issues, I think you'll be a lot happier of a person, which of course, I don't know about you, Amanda, but that's my big brass ring in life, is to be happy. Yes, you want to have a good job, and yes, you want to be successful, but at the end of the day, you want to be happy. You want to be satisfied with your life.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, you talk about that motivation from within or realizing that you have that value to offer. Is that what being qualified means to you?
Yeah, I think in many cases, or being able to draw out of yourself what the qualifications that they say they're looking for. I mean, one of the things that's still, it's still kind of a problem in the business world, to be honest with you, is the search for the perfect candidate, and how there will be hiring managers out there who really have this long laundry list of things they want the person to have, and it basically is a person at the end of the day that doesn't exist, because they've put all of their wish fulfillment into this one job position. Nobody meets all of those things. You're not describing an actual human being. You're describing if you were dreaming, and it's like you said, it's a fantasy. So I think being able to come and say, this is what I do have, and to be able to understand what they really need as a business. And I know this is tough when you're a little bit younger, and how you can bring that to the table. I mean, the best example that I saw this was actually last summer during the pandemic. There were a bunch of college interns that I knew that had their internships just unceremoniously canceled. And some people were just like, well, I guess that's it. I guess I'm not going to have an internship. And others were really enterprising about it and said, wait a second. I know these guys are going to be struggling with remote work. I know they're going to be struggling with the technology associated with the collaboration software. I know how to do those things. I can step in and help out. So even if their internship had nothing to do with that, If they were able to come and say, you know what, I know that we're not going to do the original plan of the internship, but I'd like to still encourage you to utilize me because I can help you with these things that you are now struggling with. And several of them were able to get hired. Totally different internship, but they saw what they had that the organization needed. And that's not to say that in normal circumstances, if we're ever going to go back to normal, that you would just show up for an interview and you have none of the qualifications or you have nothing to do with what the job is asking for. I'm not suggesting that, but I am suggesting that you draw out of yourself what you do have that is relevant to what they need and emphasize that. And of course, whenever we talk about resumes and interviews, we always talk about making it as measurable as possible. You want to explain to a potential employer why your previous organizations were better off because you were there. What makes your contribution something that is remembered? And that is tough sometimes when you're working at an entry level or even a mid-level. But if you think about it, there probably are things that you can quantify. And so we talk more about that in the book, of course, give a lot more specifics. But I think that that's something that even senior level people tend to forget about. They talk about what they did as opposed to the impact that they had.
Yeah. What is your team going to remember you by? What was that project that had the greatest impact? What inspired you to write Humanity Works?
Well, that's an interesting story of how I became a futurist. And Amanda, the term futurist scares a lot of people. They're like, what on earth is that? Well, it just means that I'm looking at trends that are percolating up through the world, through the market, and trying to ascertain what has the greatest potential for disruption. What are the little signals that we're seeing that could develop into big things that really massively impact society? And so remote work was an example of a trend that I've been looking at for about 10 years, where I knew that this was going to take off eventually. I didn't know there would be one precipitating event like a pandemic, but I suspected that between things like pandemics or potential pandemics and climate change, adverse climate events, that there could be something that would push people into their homes to work. And what would that look like? What are some of the tools that we would need? And so that's what futurists do. And I actually became interested in the world of the future way back in 1988. I was growing up in Washington, D.C., in the suburbs, down the street from the headquarters of the World Future Society. And my dad and I took a tour of the place, and it was so cool. This was 1988, and they had this technology they were describing called interactive television. And the idea was that it would be a device, everybody would have their own, and you would push a button and you would get to instantaneously hear the song that you've been waiting all day for the radio to play. Because back in those days, you had to have your like tape recorder on, and you would have to like hit record when the song came on the radio so that you could hear it over and over again. And I just thought, wow, this is cool. It's like entertainment on demand. And that was the precursor for the technology that we all have now, the smartphones. And I had hoped, I always kept that in the back of my mind. I hoped at some point I would bring that back into my career. And as it would have it, when I started writing and speaking about they don't teach corporate in college, the generation that's just younger than me, so I'm in a very interesting age bracket. I'm at the very young end of Generation X. The generation just younger than me is called the millennials, or Generation Y. There's a ton of them. You're a big generation. You came out like gangbusters. You knew what you wanted. You wanted to make an impact right away. You were not content to just pay your dues in a company. These were all good qualities, but companies at the time had no idea what to do with this group. They were like, oh my gosh, this is scary. We know we need these guys, but we don't know how to cope, and we don't know what they're going to need in the future. And so that's when I started getting asked, what do you think the millennials are going to be like as leaders? Like, what do you think they're going to need in terms of their professional development? And I really had to dig deep into these 22 to 25-year-olds and figure out, okay, well, if we project forward, what are they going to need? How are they going to run organizations when they get to that state? How are demographic shifts going to impact how quickly they get to that state? This was a big issue because the demographic shifts that we were expecting saw the baby boomers eventually retiring, delayed by the 2008 recession and now the pandemic, of course. But then you have a little baby generation in the middle called Generation X. Not enough Xers to replace the baby boomers. So what we kind of projected was that the millennials would be entering leadership positions much earlier than prior generations because they had to. They were the next in line. And so
they want it too. They want that
they're motivated.
responsibility.
Right. And
Yeah.
that did come to fruition, by the way. That absolutely happened when I did some research with Deloitte over 5 years ago. And at the time, the millennials who weren't even 40 yet, half of them were in leadership positions that we surveyed. And it's like, wow, they're not even 40, and half of them have direct reports and decision-making authority. So that did come to fruition. And it was extremely interesting, but I was able to bring this love of the future full circle from just being entranced by interactive television to something that I was actually working on in real life, which was human capital and workforce. And so that's how I became a workforce futurist. And I still geek out about it all the time. I love thinking about, I try not to go too far in the future. I mostly focus like 10 years or so.
Okay.
But
I want to
I
geek out. What do you imagine for the next 10 years? And as my guess, right, does it have to do with career customization?
yeah, I mean, I think that everybody is going to have a very windy career. It's really going to be quite unusual to start with one industry, to stay there, to be able to follow a path that your boss followed. Exactly. I think there's going to be a lot more steps, stairs, and plateaus where people dial up their careers and dial back depending on lifestyle circumstances. That's just going to become far more common. People always ask me, what's my biggest worry? What keeps me up at night? And it's definitely not that jobs for humans won't exist. I am not remotely worried that automation will kill human jobs. What I am worried about is that the human jobs that we are going to have need to be a little bit different. And I am worried about certain populations having the ability to skill in different directions to fill the job categories that we will have, because there will be a ton of jobs. I love to say every time you insert a machine into a human driven process, you still need a human there to build the machine component, to manage it, to fix it when it breaks, to figure out if it needs to be redeployed. That's a lot of people, but people have to understand what they need to know to get those jobs. And a key skill set is what I call applied technology skills. So it's not that you have to know how to code a machine, or you need to know robotics engineering, or you need to know how to build an app, but you do need to know where you can get those resources. How can you get those things done? What is the technology that currently exists that can help you do your job better? And everybody in every role, in every function, in every company, in every industry needs to have these applied tech skills. And I think that's where my concern is, that there will be people who are left behind because they don't know how to work with machines. That is the biggest thing that we're going to see in the next 10 years, is that all jobs are going to involve a component of machine partnership and working with algorithms and working with robotic process automation. And you have to be cool with making that transition. And I think it's not universally an old person thing where, oh, the baby boomers, they can't get with the program. That's not necessarily true. And we were very much forced into rapid change this past year. And it's a little bit gratifying for me because almost everything that's happened was actually in Humanity Works, which was published in late 2018. But at the time, I wasn't sure how long it was going to take these trends to take off. And it's been kind of nice, not that I would wish a global pandemic on anyone, but it's been kind of nice to see from a workforce perspective the speed at which things can happen if we have no choice. If we're motivated. And that is kind of what I see. I see now this huge opportunity to keep up the momentum and to be extremely efficient in the way that we work going forward, and to avoid so much unnecessary overhead and processes that really don't do anything, that don't accomplish anything. And overall, I think that organizations have gotten a huge jump start on things like digital transformation, that they can just now ride the wave in a way, keep doing what you're doing, because the worst thing we could do is go back at this point.
Mm-hmm. And you hear people saying, oh, I just want things to go back to normal, back to the way. And
Nope.
once you've opened this Pandora's box of the flexibility that the virtual work world has brought to us, going back is not going to look the same. There is no
No,
going back. And
no.
hopefully we can see the opportunity in moving forward. I mean, that's what I hope for, at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
I think a lot of the younger generations, I think, are on board with that too.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I do hear companies saying, we're going to bring everybody back. And I'm like, have you talked to your employees? Because I don't think that's going to fly.
Mhm. Tell me about how your career as a writer, consultant, speaker, workplace expert, you're doing a lot, and futurist. How does it
Mhm.
align with your personal passions?
It's a great question. Well, I mentioned the personal passion around the future. I love science fiction. I love creating scenarios. I love to learn. I love to be agile and to figure out what I want to do next. So definitely the pace of my career and the way that it's pivoted over time is something that aligns with my personal values and interests. I think too, I made a very conscious decision early on that I was not going to stay in communications. And the reason I made that is because I saw the senior level people who worked in agencies and who worked as the lead communications or PR marketing person for a large Fortune 500. And I saw the way they worked and how their work life balance, or I don't really love that term, but work life integration was sorely impacted. And I knew I was going to have a baby and I didn't want that for my life. So I created a career where at the time it was very difficult to have a full-time job and have any flexibility. So I created my own, and that was why I started my own business. And I still think it's important. People will tend to say that, well, you just want to be around when your kids are babies. But in fact, my opinion is that it's the most important to be around when your kids actually recognize you for you. When they're babies, anyone can take care of them. And when they're a little bit older, they want their mom or their dad or two moms or whatever combination they've got. They want those parents there, or there's caregivers that they trust there. And that's really how I've built my career is from a place where I can really be present for my kids, for the important things that they're doing, just to talk with them. And yeah, I mean, I think I've managed to do that pretty well. I'm fairly happy with the way things have gone in that respect over the last, I don't know, 15 years or so.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love your strategy too for taking your natural inclination to look to the
Mhm.
future and doing that in that moment by looking to who was going to, what your future could have looked like by looking to the leaders in
Mhm.
your company. So if
Yeah.
you're listening right now, take that moment to look and see what your trajectory could look like by looking to who's in that director position now,
Yeah.
who are
Yeah.
the VPs of your company, and noting, what you like, what you don't like, what you want to continue on with and what you don't,
Yeah.
and take control over your
Yeah.
career journey.
Yeah. I mean, or are there people at all in the position that you want to be in? I mean, that's a big
Ooh.
one. It's like if you don't see role models for the life that you want to build for yourself, that's a huge red flag because you're not going to be the first to like penetrate this area that is not acceptable within the culture of that particular company. There are definitely companies that are better than others when it comes to work life integration. And that's not to say, I mean, hey, work life integration is something most people want, but that means different things to different people. So you don't necessarily need like a quote unquote family friendly environment. If family is not something that you want to emphasize, that's fine. The point is to understand your own goals in life and not just work goals, but what do you want to see your life look like from a very comprehensive perspective? And can you model that? Can you look to other people in the organization and say, yeah, that's the life I kind of want in 10 years. If you can look even further than that, that's even better. But you have to see that. If you don't see that, don't think you're going to be the person to change it, because I'm nothing if not pragmatic. And I tend to think that that isn't possible for one person to change the culture of a whole organization.
Yeah, if you don't see it in your company, see if you can find it somewhere else.
Yeah,
Find
and
this
you
person
can't.
though. There's someone that is doing something that you are envisioning. So find that person, learn how
Yep,
they got to where they are. Maybe it means you're going to be taking a complete turn in your
yep,
career,
that's right.
um, to get to be in that role
Yeah,
instead of hoping that it's going to happen when you're on this current path.
right. Or I'll
Um,
just stay here for a while and just like a relationship that isn't working out. Like, just
ooh.
sticking around just to kind of see if things will magically change, you're just going to waste more time. And I mean, there's time is at a premium no matter what stage of life we're in. I mean, whether it's you're in your 20s and you really want to make your career grow as fast as possible, or you're in your 30s and you want to have that balance a little bit more. And again, we're just using generalities here, but I think it's very important to kind of think strategically about what you want as early and as often as possible.
Okay, so tell me about the object you brought and how it reflects your passion.
My object is this Rubik's Cube, and it reflects my passion in several ways. First of all, this is branded with Axiom, which is one of my favorite clients. And I like this because, first of all, there's a lot of magic that is done with Rubik's Cubes. And
Can you solve a Rubik's Cube? Can you solve it?
I used to be able to. I just got this like a couple of months ago, and I haven't really had time to like revisit it, but I used to be able to. But I love that there's so many magic tricks that involve Rubik's Cubes where you're just like, how did the person do that? And it just speaks to me that, or it says to me that people are capable of so many great things, and that sometimes things seem magical because the universe is guiding you in a particular direction and everything works out the way that it's meant to. So I love that. I also love the chaos inherent in the cube that's not solved. Like, you just look at it, you're like, man, I could take one small step toward the answer and just have to trust that that's the best that I can do at this time, and that it's okay to be, as we talked about, a little bit uncertain and to not know exactly what the solution is going to be in the end. So that's my Rubik's Cube.
Oh, I love that.
You're
All
welcome.
right. I have a lot of great takeaways here. I hope all of you listening do as well. Remember that there's going to be that uncertainty, that the future of work is nonlinear, as Alexandra described. And my favorite one of all is stop wasting time. Get intentional. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was just wonderful to speak with you.
You're welcome, Amanda. Thanks again for having me. It was great. And if anybody wants to follow up with questions, you can find me on alexandralevit.com or Twitter at @alevit, Levit.
Wonderful. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for listening to our show. Be sure to check out the show notes and email any questions to yourpassioncareer@gmail.com. Bye.